Good afternoon, everyone. So when we set out to build the process for this third national climate assessment, one of the first things that we really wanted to take on was making sure that it was a process that would engage people. And so we looked back to our earlier assessments and looked to the stakeholder involvement that we had in those. So in the first assessment in 2000, in the final report, there were findings that stakeholder involvement was essential to the process, and at the very end it said that that involvement was vital to continuation of the assessment process. In 2007, the National Research Council looked at global change assessments, including the first national assessment as well as others like IPCC, and found that engagement, communication, and transparency throughout the process, again, are vital elements of successful assessments. And then with the second assessment in 2009, although the assessment itself did not have much public participation, at the end it included a vision for a sustained and extensive stakeholder involvement as a part of future assessments. So when we set out to establish engagement and communications as a focus within the NCA3, we started with a number of foundation stones. The first were agency-sponsored process and methodology workshops that brought in members of the scientific community, user communities, federal agencies, and others to talk about the methods of doing assessment. And these process and methodology workshops really set up the framework for how we would put the assessment together, how we would use the scientific information, and how we would use information from experts and public participation. Within our Federal Advisory Committee, the NACADAC, we had an engagement and communication working group that focused on creating a strategy for engagement, communication, and participation within the assessment. Also within the strategic plan of the U.S. Global Change Research Program, there are goals that are specific to conducting sustained assessments and to communicating and educating about climate change and global change. And both of those goals include public participation and communication as a part of achieving those goals. You saw the vision earlier in Rosina's slides, and we'll just skip this for now. And there we are. So you saw earlier the vision, and you'll see that the vision includes an inclusive, broad-based, and sustained process, a process that would include people beyond the traditional academic sphere, to have folks who are authors, who are members of our Federal Advisory Committee, and members of the public in the assessment process. And so we set up an engagement strategy that would create a more effective and successful assessment by engaging stakeholders in the creation and use of the assessment for decision making, by making sure that there was space for conversation throughout the process with people who would use the assessment, people who would contribute to the assessment, and all of this with the goal of ensuring that the assessment is and is perceived as a credible, salient, and legitimate document. So how did we engage? First, we built human capital. We identified individuals and organizations who would produce and use assessment information, and we invited those people into the process. Scientists, policymakers, managers, others from government, business, and industry, academia, and the NGO world. The teams that created the assessment, our Interagency National Climate Assessment Working Group, which is the federal agencies that worked on the assessment, our Federal Advisory Committee, the National Climate Assessment and Development Advisory Committee, including its working groups and the 300 report authors that wrote the report, our regional and sectoral technical input teams, and our partnership network, NCANet. All of these drew from a wide variety of people who contributed to the assessment in many ways. We also had communication and engagement training for our Federal Advisory Committee and for our report authors ahead of both the release of the draft and the final report to help them speak about the report and engage with their communities. So as you can see, we had a lot of people working on the assessment. This is just to show you we had folks from the federal government, we had our Federal Advisory Committee, and then we had those external partners. And the success of the assessment was really due to all of those different groups working together. We provided repeated opportunities for input about the assessment. We requested public comment on the assessment objectives and proposed topics early on in the process, and we provided another opportunity for public comment on the draft report when it came out in January of 2013. We also used an innovative process to solicit even more input from the community. We asked for these technical inputs that talked about specific regions or specific sectors and brought that information forward for our author teams. And many of those technical inputs are excellent documents in their own right and are available through programs like GLISA and other partners. We also had opportunities for public comment at all of our Federal Advisory Committee meetings. We had, as I said before, the topical workshops, the methodology and process workshops, as well as workshops that focused on the creation of various technical inputs. And those teams had a number of public workshops to bring in comments and ideas from a larger community. Finally, we used listening sessions and town hall meetings at professional society meetings to solicit comments and input from various members of different scientific communities, as well as regional town hall meetings during the public comment period that allowed members of the public to interact with the report authors and to talk about the impacts of climate change on their communities and prepare them to provide public comment on the report. So you can see sort of how that process went along here, and I just wanted to highlight along the side, you'll see available from GLISA, the Midwest Technical Input Report, that fed into that technical input report process there. So all of those went to our chapter author teams. The author teams then put together their drafts, sent it to the Federal Advisory Committee. There was the public and expert review. So in addition to the public comments, we had a review by the National Research Council, review by the agencies in the White House, and then finally the report that came out this spring. We also used various mechanisms of ongoing communication to spread the word about the assessment throughout the process. The U.S. Global Change Research Program website had a section specifically about the assessment and about our ongoing engagement activities. We had a bi-monthly newsletter that provided an opportunity for people to learn about what was happening in the assessment process, learn about some of the opportunities that they might have to comment or attend sessions about the assessment. We made the workshop and technical input reports available throughout the process so that folks could see what was happening and use that information as it became available. And we had organized sessions and presentations at professional society meetings, at conferences, and other gatherings so that people could learn about what was happening in the assessment and provide some comments back to us. And perhaps one of our largest engagement efforts has been building this network of partners, NCANet, that I mentioned earlier. This network connects the assessment to partner organizations, members, and stakeholders, and allows us to be in touch with hundreds of thousands of people who already work with those organizations, and through those organizations can become aware of the National Climate Assessment. We can build long-term capacity to conduct and use assessments and cultivate partnerships with a wide variety of organizations and people. So our network meets monthly. We also have affinity groups that focus on a particular area of shared interest like communications or education, and those groups work together to develop additional products, additional opportunities to outreach and provide input back to the assessment. So we now have over 140 partners in NCANet, drawn from the faith community, from NGOs, professional societies, business and industry, a variety of academic and educational organizations, state and local government, and tribal groups. And what do they do? Our NCANet partners are one of the keys to doing outreach around the assessment and allowing folks to learn about what's happening and what's in the assessment. So they hold webinars and in-person events where they host authors and members of our Federal Advisory Committee to speak about the report, allow their members to learn about it, and engage in conversations. They host online chats with Reddit, Google Hangouts, and other ways to provide interaction through the web and in person. host panels that focus on particular topics like hunger in the age of climate change. And many of these events happen not only in person or one time on the web, but are archived so that folks can go back and see them over time. So how did this actually impact the report and sustained process? It helped us select topics for the report, to explore new and expanded methods for assessment, and helped add the so what through examples, case studies, and conceptual models, and provide a practical perspective on why and how the report would be used so that as we refine the report, we'd be able to deliver something that people would be interested and able to use right off the bat. And it was fairly successful. You can see just a few of the front pages from May 7, the day after the report came out, which show that folks saw the report and its content as something that was interesting and useful, not just at the national level, but also at the regional level. So thank you.
In which plants that produce allergenic pollens is lengthened, and thus people with allergies are suffering more greatly, and those who are